Good evening, Jeff Hiscock with the late news. Union leader John Halfpenny says he hopes the ALP's national executive will reconsider its intervention today in the selection of the party's Senate ticket in Victoria. Mr. Halfpenny was elected by the left-dominated Victorian branch to replace the party's Senate leader, John Button, at the top of the ticket. However, the national executive held a telex poll and reinstated Senator Button. Mr. Halfpenny said tonight the executive's action was a potential for trouble in the Victorian ALP and within the union movement. Ian Henderson reports.
Senator Button felt the icy blast of rank-and-file disaffection with some of the Hawke government's policies. The left, which dominated the 100-member committee, deserted Senator Button and delivered half the votes polled and top spot on the ticket to Union Chief John Halfpenny. Senator Gareth Evans' right-wing Labor Unity colleagues rallied to his cause, leaving Senator Button with just 8 votes and the risky third spot on the ticket. It was an embarrassing rebuff, and Senator Button left the meeting without comment. But later, in an apparent reference to uranium exports to France, he blamed unpopular budget decisions for the move against him.
One gets these things in politics, ups and downs. I suppose this is a down today.
John Halfpenny condemned what he termed the executive's political immaturity and impetuosity. And while he said he'd work to restore calm in the Victorian branch, his warning of earlier in the day would give the ALP machine little comfort.
The ACTU executive is to consider a plan for a third prices and incomes accord that for the first time would include employers. The proposal, still in its planning stages, is based on the findings of a union delegation which recently toured Sweden.
There's a need to bring the employers into these discussions. There's a need to have a commitment by all parties to the objectives, and clearly there's a need to turn the economy around. And to do that, you need all 3 partners involved. Now, our examination of the Swedish system demonstrated that it can be done with the cooperation of all 3 partners.
Mr. McBean concedes that not all employers will want to get involved, but for its part, the Australian Chamber of Manufacturers is keen to talk.
Well, I think the employers will welcome an acknowledgement by Mr. McBean that the current accord is not suitable for the circumstances in which we now find ourselves, and in that respect it is a refreshing change to hear this call that we should all sit down together and see what we can do.
Australia's Trade Minister John Dawkins says the agreement on agriculture reached at World Trade Talks in Uruguay marks a turning point in international trade negotiations. For the first time, agriculture has been brought into discussions under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, giving Australia's farm sector a glimmer of hope. Jean Campbell reports.
The talks, under the auspices of GATT, were aimed at freeing world trade from restricted practices. The new talks, to be known as the Uruguay round, are expected to be more complex than any of the previous 7 rounds, but should make serious advances of the difficult problems of agriculture and services. Observers describe the breakthrough as a major victory for the principles of free trade.
British Rail says the death toll in yesterday's crash in the English Midlands could have been higher but for the actions of one of its train drivers. The driver leapt from his cabin seconds before impact and, despite being badly shocked, carried out the emergency drill of placing circuit breakers on the line to stop following trains ploughing into the wreckage. Daylight revealed the full extent of the crash. Exactly what happened is still being investigated, but railway officials now say the northbound train was only edging slowly across the junction when the speeding southbound express from Liverpool struck it a glancing blow on the side. The Liverpool driver was killed, and at first it was thought a second railway employee had been travelling in the cab. Huge cranes have been brought in to remove the wreckage, but it will be Wednesday at least before the line is clear. The United States is reported to have proposed to the Soviet Union at the arms talks in Geneva that each nation limit itself to 200 medium-range nuclear warheads. According to the New York Times, each side would be limited to 100 warheads within range of Europe. The remaining 100 Soviet warheads would be deployed in Asia, and the remaining 100 American warheads would be kept in the United States. There was no immediate comment from the State Department. The first cricket test between Australia and India in Madras appears to be heading for a draw. India was all out today for 397 in reply to Australia's 7 for 574 declared. At stumps, Australia was 5 for 170 in its second innings. Now finally, the forecasts in brief for tomorrow: fine or becoming fine in most capitals, sunny periods in Sydney, a few showers in Perth. Good night.